She entered the courtroom in silence, dressed neatly, her expression fragile yet strangely composed. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and all eyes followed her as she sat down. Diana Lovejoy, the woman everyone whispered about. A mother, a wife, a victim, or a villain, no one could quite decide. Moments later, her composure cracked. Tears rolled freely as she hid her face in trembling hands. To the jury, it looked like the grief of a woman drowning in regret. But to those who knew the case, those tears had a darker shadow, because behind them lay a story of betrayal, manipulation, and a plan that could have ended in murder. Years before this moment, she was just Diana, a woman living what seemed to be a picture-perfect California life. When she met Greg Mulvihill in 2005, everything felt effortless. He was kind, grounded, the type who smiled easily and worked hard. They built a home together, shared laughter, and in 2012, welcomed a baby boy who became the heart of their world. Their friends saw them as the ideal couple, active, adventurous, and deeply devoted to their son. But what no one saw was the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface, one that would grow louder with every passing year. Arguments began subtly. Small disagreements about parenting, about how to raise their child, how to spend, how to live. Soon those disagreements turned into accusations. Diana began to change. Friends noticed it first. The once energetic, joyful woman became anxious, always suspicious, convinced Greg was hiding things. She claimed he was dangerous, that he couldn't be trusted. Whether it was fear or obsession, something inside her shifted, and it was irreversible. By 2014, the love story had become a legal war. Their divorce proceedings dragged on like a wound that refused to heal. Custody battles, restraining orders, court filings. Every document filed was another layer of bitterness. In those dark months, Diana met someone new, Weldon McDavid Jr., a former Marine and firearms instructor. He was strong, confident, disciplined, everything she believed she had lost. Their friendship deepened quickly, but so did the darkness within her. According to investigators, that relationship didn't just bring her comfort. It gave her an idea, a dangerous one that would turn her heartbreak into something much colder. Because Diana Lovejoy wasn't just about to lose her marriage. She was about to lose control. And she wasn't going to let that happen. It was a quiet September night in 2016 when Greg Mulvihill received the call that would change everything. The voice on the other end sounded urgent, convincing, even helpful. The man claimed to have evidence that could clear Greg's name in the custody battle. Proof, he said, that would expose lies and restore his reputation. Greg hesitated for a moment, suspicious but hopeful. After years of tension and accusation, this sounded like a breakthrough. He agreed to meet, choosing a remote dirt trail in Carlsbad, California, and bringing a friend along for safety. The night was heavy, the air still. Greg parked his car, stepped out, and looked into the darkness. Then, a single gunshot tore through the silence. Pain exploded through his body, and confusion followed. He had seen a rifle. He had seen the glint of metal. But in that split second, nothing made sense. Instinct took over. He ran, staggering, his friend shouting beside him. More shots echoed behind them, rapid and deliberate. But by some miracle, Greg survived. The ambush had failed, and that failure would unravel everything. Within hours, investigators were combing through the scene, searching for clues. The shooter had disappeared into the night, but he hadn't vanished completely. Phone records, surveillance footage, and text messages began to draw an unmistakable pattern. The prepaid phone used to lure Greg there. It was purchased by Diana Lovejoy. The man behind the rifle, her firearms instructor, Weldon McDavid. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed a picture darker than anyone wanted to believe. When detectives confronted Diana, she didn't panic. She was polite, calm, her voice steady. She denied everything, insisting she knew nothing about any plan or shooting. She said she feared Greg, that she only wanted to protect herself and her son. But as the evidence piled up, her story began to fracture. The digital trail told a different version, one that placed her not as the frightened victim she claimed to be, but as the orchestrator of a deadly trap. Investigators soon uncovered messages and patterns that revealed coordination, timing, locations, and conversations that aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. The plan had been deliberate, but even more chilling was the motive prosecutors believed drove it all. Fear of losing her son, her money, and her image. To them, this wasn't desperation. It was control disguised as survival. And now, the woman who once claimed to be terrified was about to become the focus of one of California's most disturbing courtroom dramas. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation when the trial began. Reporters filled the benches, sketch artists flipped open their pads, and behind Diana's calm expression was the shadow of everything she tried to hide. She appeared soft-spoken, careful in her movements, almost fragile. The image of a woman wronged. That's what her defense wanted the jury to see. But the prosecution was ready to tear that illusion apart piece by piece. They began with the facts: the phone purchased under her name, the timing of her calls, the connection to Weldon McDavid. Every document, every timestamp painted a picture of intent. The prosecutor's voice was steady, unrelenting, describing how a custody dispute had twisted into something darker, an obsession with control and revenge. They argued that Diana Lovejoy hadn't acted in fear but in fury, determined to end the man she once called her husband. Then came the testimony. When Greg Mulvihill took the stand, the entire courtroom fell into silence. He recounted that night in detail: the phone call, the drive to the trail, the sudden flash of light. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the disbelief that someone he once loved could have orchestrated his death. "It felt like someone hit me in the back," he said softly. "But when I turned, I saw a rifle." His words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. He had been struck by a bullet, but somehow survived, and now, face to face with Diana, he told the world what he believed she had done. Greg's testimony exposed not just the attack, but the manipulation leading up to it. He described how, after their separation, Diana accused him of horrible things: abuse, danger, neglect. She filed restraining orders, built narratives of fear, and convinced people she was the victim. But each claim was dismissed, unsupported by evidence. The court saw the pattern, and Greg saw the motive. To him, this wasn't protection. It was a calculated attempt to destroy him. One step at a time. As he spoke, Diana kept her head bowed, tears glistening under the courtroom lights. Some thought she was breaking under guilt. Others saw something else: performance. Because for years she had controlled the story. But now, for the first time, the truth wasn't hers to tell. It was his. And as Greg's voice filled the courtroom, the illusion of the grieving wife began to crumble. When the defense took their turn, the tone in the courtroom shifted. They painted Diana as a woman trapped, frightened, cornered, and emotionally destroyed by years of conflict. They said she wasn't plotting anything sinister. She was simply misunderstood, manipulated by a man she trusted. Her lawyer described her as the victim of her own vulnerability, drawn into chaos by Weldon McDavid, the former Marine who knew her weaknesses and exploited them. It was a desperate narrative, one that relied on sympathy, on convincing the jury that the tears they saw were real. But the prosecution wasn't done. They brought in evidence that silenced the room: call logs, messages, and GPS data that tied her movements to the very moment of the ambush. They showed how the prepaid phone was purchased just days before the attack, traced directly to Diana. Surveillance footage showed her car near McDavid's the night of the shooting. There was no escaping it. Every breadcrumb led back to her. And then came the money. Greg had been about to receive $120,000 as part of their divorce settlement. Money Diana didn't want to part with. Prosecutors revealed that shortly after the attack, she made strange financial moves, hinting at a payout for McDavid. They argued that the motive wasn't just emotional. It was financial. To them, Diana's tears weren't grief. They were guilt. The jury watched as witnesses described her transformation, from loving wife to someone consumed by control. Even her own statements worked against her. In recorded interviews, her tone wavered between defensiveness and denial. "I would never do that," she said repeatedly. "I thought of my son growing up without a father." But prosecutors countered, showing how her fear of losing custody had driven her to extremes. The more she insisted she didn't remember, the more deliberate her choices appeared. And then, the man she trusted most turned against her. Weldon McDavid took the stand. Calm, collected, almost emotionless, he admitted to pulling the trigger, but he claimed Diana was the one who planned it all. He said she asked him to take care of her problem, convincing him Greg was a threat. He described their conversations, their plans, and the moment everything went wrong. The courtroom felt frozen. The betrayal was complete. McDavid's testimony unfolded. Diana's mask began to crack. Her hands trembled. Her face tightened. For years, she'd blamed everyone else, Greg, the court's fate. But now, there was no one left to blame. The truth was unraveling faster than she could hide it. The tension in the courtroom had become unbearable by the time the verdict neared. The jury had heard it all. The phone records, the late-night ambush, the testimony of a man who nearly lost his life, and the confession of the shooter who said he did it for her. The air felt heavy with judgment. Every eye fixed on Diana Lovejoy as she sat at the defense table, her gaze distant, her lips pressed tightly together. For the first time, she looked truly small, swallowed by the enormity of what she'd done. When the foreperson stood to read the verdict, the silence was absolute. We, the jury, find the defendant, Diana Lovejoy, guilty of attempted murder. The words echoed across the room like a sentence carried on steel. Then came the second verdict, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. A wave of emotion surged through the courtroom. Some gasped. Others simply watched in disbelief. And then, in the most unforgettable moment of the entire trial, Diana's body went rigid. Her face drained of color. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed. The courtroom erupted. Deputies rushed forward. Reporters scrambled, and paramedics were called inside. The woman who had once been in full control, who lied, who plotted, who manipulated, was now motionless on the floor. Cameras captured every second. The footage spread across the nation within hours, people arguing whether it was genuine shock or another performance. Some pitied her, saying the pressure had finally broken her. Others believed it was one last act, an attempt to rewrite the narrative even in defeat. As she was taken to the hospital for observation, Greg Mulvihill sat quietly, watching. There was no celebration in his eyes, only exhaustion. The years of fear, of false accusations, of standing as the villain in her story, they were finally over. But the victory was hollow. He had survived the ambush, but he had lost nearly everything else. Peace, trust, and the woman he once thought he knew. When Diana returned to court days later, her composure had returned, but the world no longer believed her. Every tear, every tremble, every plea for innocence had been weighed against the evidence. The mask of the grieving mother had shattered, revealing what lay beneath. A woman who had tried to destroy the father of her child, and failed. And as the judge prepared to hand down her sentence, the courtroom once again fell into that haunting, heavy silence. The kind that comes when justice is about to speak. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of everything that had been uncovered. The lies, the planning, the betrayal disguised as fear. He looked directly at Diana Lovejoy and said her actions went beyond desperation. They were deliberate, calculated, cold. The courtroom listened as he delivered her sentence. 26 years to life in prison. Beside her, the man she once called her protector, Weldon McDavid, received 50 years to life. 2 lives bound together by a single terrible choice, to turn pain into violence. As the gavel fell, Diana sat still, tears streaking down her face, staring at the floor. No more acting, no more cameras to play to, just silence. The same silence she had filled years earlier with accusations and deceit. The same silence that had greeted her when she realized the story she wrote, the one where she was the victim, had finally turned against her. Somewhere in that quiet, Greg Mulvihill stood again, a man who had walked through every stage of betrayal and survived. He would go home to his son, to rebuild what was left of his life, while the woman who tried to destroy him began hers behind bars. The aftermath of the trial echoed far beyond that courtroom. The video of Diana's courtroom collapse went viral, sparking endless debates. Was it real? Was it guilt? Or was it the final curtain drop in a long performance? people couldn't agree. To some, she was a broken woman crushed by her own choices. To others, she was an expert manipulator who couldn't handle the truth when it finally caught up with her. But whatever anyone believed, one fact remained. Her tears came too late. In interviews and court statements, she claimed she'd never wanted Greg dead, that she'd been misunderstood, that her only fear was losing her son. But the evidence told a story that no amount of emotion could erase. The phone calls, the planning, the shot fired in the dark. All of it pointed to intent. Years later, the case still stands as a chilling example of how love, when twisted by resentment and fear, can become something monstrous. It forces one haunting question: when someone cries in court, are they mourning what they've done, or mourning the loss of control now slipping through their fingers? For Diana Lovejoy, the answer may forever remain hidden behind those tears. The same tears that once fooled everyone, until the truth finally broke through.